Innovate US team for asking me to share a few thoughts in this regard. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can have a visual just to guide us a little bit here. There we go. So today, it was interesting as folks were joining and signing on. Some really neat, and I actually wrote down a couple of them. I'm sure I missed a few, but we saw someone with the title of Experience Architect, Learning Officer, Innovation Officer, and Digital Experience Officer. So I am sure I've been in the IT world for a little over 4 decades, and I guarantee you a decade ago, you would not have had that kind of a diverse set of titles. It's all CIO, COO, CTO, right? That was, the norm. And then now that we're approaching information technology from a business perspective, and obviously our talk today is going to be on generative AI, it's just really neat to see the evolution of our whole industry and our whole workforce. So I'm glad, Hannah, thanks for encouraging folks to do that, because some really cool titles there, exciting ones. Okay, so hopefully this is why am I here, and why in the world would Hannah, and by the way, Hannah's colleague and a close colleague of mine is Beth Novak, who was instrumental in the GovLab, which is one of the organizations that's doing research and advocacy and teachings and workshops for a number of topics, artificial intelligence being one of them. And so I was kind of asked, certainly not representing myself as the expert or an expert. There are so many individuals who probably know more in their pinky than I do. But when I saw the proliferation of generative AI, obviously many of us would probably find the calendar somewhere near February to April of this year. It really started to get prominent. Yes, there was AI before that, and obviously it took on many forms. But I said, hey, I love to learn. So I started diving in. I signed up for podcasts. I got an account of, the Microsoft and then the AWS and DALL-E, and I played around with it. So just by immersing myself as much as reasonably possible, hopefully I picked up a few aspects that I'm happy to share with you today. Again, not authoritative, but it's going to be set in the context of Gen AI within the context of government. I happen to be part of a state government, but I think some of the themes that we may talk about today are going to be applicable to municipal, county, state, and maybe even other levels. So please be patient with me as I'm, this is a second job for me. So this is certainly not, not my main. As Hannah said, I'm very proud to lead the New Jersey Office of Information Technology, NJOIT. We have a great team here, and our charter is to support all of the infrastructure for the state of New Jersey, the entire executive branch. Our agencies basically own their applications, and we provide all the infrastructure. Going to be joining us in a little while today is Dave Cole. Dave is a colleague and friend. Dave is a technical director from the Office of Innovation. We mentioned that Beth Novak is our Chief Innovation Officer. And within that organization is Dave Cole, and he's been a tremendous colleague to learn alongside of. And I probably peppered Dave with more questions than he would care to admit, but he's been terrific. And Dave is going to help us and lead a couple of real world examples a little bit later on in the hour. So obviously, a little bit about what it is. Now, I'm gonna take a flyer here and say that probably much more than half of the folks understand what Gen AI is, have a good sense of it. So I'm just going to touch on a little bit for maybe some that maybe this is an early exposure for them to what is Gen AI. And then, of course, we're going to focus on government use, right? We have some key issues that we really not need to be mindful of. And hopefully I'll touch on a number of them that you may find of interest. All right, so, a lot of folks, use the term. And by the way, this throughout this, this is not in any way a preference, an endorsement of any one company's technology, not at all. We use at least 3 companies' technologies within this realm right now, and they're all terrific. They all have their own unique traits and so forth. But just with some of the more common colloquial usage in terms, I may say one or the other, but again, there's so much commonality and there's some individualization amongst these tools that, it's probably worth it to get a good idea of what they are. So, I always said, I know what chat means. So what is the GPT part? And that's the generative, means it creates content. Pre-trained transformer. The transformer is it transforms text or tokens into numbers, large strings of numbers, and it uses those large strings of numbers, vectors, in how it associates and predicts, let's say, the next word or the next sentence that it may produce. So that's just the term in a general sense. Large language models, or LLMs, right? These are the large foundational models on which these are trained. I'm going to speak a little bit more in a few slides about the concepts of training and what that means for us. Many of us have in the news or 60 Minutes or through technical journals may have heard of a company, OpenAI. I'm sure there are probably arguments that can be made one way or the other about where it was founded or thought of, but a lot of folks would recognize OpenAI as being the company founded in the middle of the past decade, and they really kind of rocketed the visibility and the usability of ChatGPT in this case. Microsoft became a large investor in that technology, and OpenAI started as a nonprofit, but then they also have now kind of forked in the road, and they also have a for-profit company, and it probably shocks no one given the tremendous investment in this. So where ChatGPT may be used, there are at least a dozen other ones. Bard, Google puts Bard out there, a great tool. Titan and Bedrock are 2 of the flagship tools that Amazon Web Services uses, and this is just a subset. Prompt engineering is probably a term that should be or will be likely used a lot by maybe a lot of the folks that have interest in this workshop, because it's probably the most relevant to using AI. Probably few, if any, of us are going to or work for an entity that's going to generate and actually train their own large language model. It could happen, and it could happen as technology advances and changes, but more likely prompt engineering and using these tools and technologies are going to be the more likely way that we interface with generative AI. And again, terms like embedding, fine-tuning, LLM training, right? These are some of the jobs that we're going to be seeing jobs posting for, the market demand for, and so forth. I'm going to jump next. Let's see. All right. And this slide I used when I kind of gave a briefing to our cabinet and some of our state CIOs, right? And this was even 5 months ago, where it as soon as it just became kind of a word that rolled off of newscasters and commentators, as soon as it rolled off onto our airways, right? Already K-12, even middle school and higher ed, a lot of times works of research or assignments are handed in, and it's almost impossible to tell. It requires a massive skill set for these professors and these educators to tell whether or not the student actually is the author of that work. Just a challenge. And many of us have heard the term, hey, ask Dr. Google when you see a spot or you feel a pain or an ache. Well, this is a whole nother, level of that kind of capability because it speaks to you so clearly and personably. I thought this was, and again, these slides, I still think they have some relevance for the, if you're not that familiar with it. And I know it struck a chord because we all of us know or have or use Spotify, very popular. A lot of times within the tech industry, one of the barometers they use for adoption rates is how long it took to get 1 million downloads, 1 million users. So Spotify, that's pretty fast, right? 150 days, less than half a year. And then of course, Instagram, right? Insta went crazy, and less than half of that time, or half of the time it took Spotify. But those are still pretty, to get to 1 million, those are pretty impressive adoption rates. Well, ChatGPT, 5 days to get to 1 million. So that kind of demonstrates in a visual sense just how quick the adoption and the fascination because this technology came about. I have 2 slides here, and they both say the same words on them, but I'm gonna emphasize a couple things. Why is it generating this interest, and why has it piqued so many people's interest that really may not have had much interest in technology? They're not tech focused. Well, it's so natural sounding. I'm assuming probably at least half, probably more than half, have used it. You've asked it about, to describe something or a TV show or a novel that you've read or something about geography. And it speaks to you in such, legitimate sounding human language. And it breaks all kind of barriers that people had with things like Boolean language and SQL statements and so forth. But it just breaks all those barriers. Really, really seems like it's intelligent conversations, even humorous, even sarcastic, even insightful. And it can take on these language models, and these Gen AI tools can take on different persona. I'm sure many of us have said, hey, why is the sky blue? And, it answers you in 50 words or 100 words. Then you say, why is the sky blue? Tell me like a pirate. And sure enough, "Aye, matey," and so forth and so on. So it really can take on different persona. In some cases, questions are asked and it says, tell me like I'm just learning the language, or tell me like I'm 6 years old. So that's an interesting and rather unexpected, capability of these language models. But it's so eloquently presented that it just automatically generates seeming legitimacy. All right, now, same words, but it can be factually incorrect. And if we're using it as just learning something or trying to do some research and so forth, and it can give you maybe a wrong answer or an answer that is largely correct, but one element of it may not be correct, right? This is where we have to start taking specific interest as a government entity. Right? There's a danger. And they call these hallucinations. We talk about some of the terms coming up, but sometimes it can cite a wrong author of a novel. It can cite, you can ask it, for example, research, maybe even a book or a novel, and it can get 5 characters correct, and then it gets the 6th one incorrect. Sometimes it can generate pictures and videos that are like almost correct, but then if you look really close, you'll see a misformed hand or something like that. So these are some of the things that point out why we in the government sector, in the government space, have to be really careful. We should learn about generative AI. We should use it. We should learn ways that we can deliver better services to our residents and our citizens. And we should not fear it. We should learn about it, but we do have to do so with a sense of balance. Another aspect that sometimes this has been shared and maybe known but I'll bet you many on this call may not be aware of this. So earlier in the year, the common free, no charge version of generative AI that was out there and being adopted very quickly was ChatGPT. Back then it was ChatGPT version 3. So when I made this presentation, I wanted to give something that anchored with our state CIOs. All of us know our state data center, and many of our cabinet have been through tours there. And it's a huge building, racks and racks of enterprise storage and compute, mainframe services, and firewalls and all of what you'd expect in a data center. And in that data center, we show them where all of our processors are, where all the servers. Well, we took a count, and there's 5,810 servers there, processor cores. So with that number in mind, almost 6,000 just to train one version of ChatGPT. This is training it. It took 285,000 cores. So what resonates with some of our folks is that's like 49 of our entire state of New Jersey data centers. That runs every agency's application, all of the databases, all of our websites, all of our compute power in that data center times 49. And again, that's just to train that one version of ChatGPT. So just to give you a sense of scale, how much that we also have to be aware that the processing power and therefore cost, right? It's not insignificant. Another way of looking at it is the actual kilowatt hours would power 700 homes, average US homes, for a year. And the electricity charges cost them $3.2 million US. That's what it cost the cloud providers just for the electricity charges to train the earlier version of ChatGPT. So, okay, so we have some of those power concerns. And again, because they're offered by many of our cloud service providers, to actually use them is rather cheap. The pricing models is rather cheap. Now, when you think large scale, that could be statewide or federal or some other large entity. That's when you have to really model out and you have to think about your use cases and how that may scale up faster than you may have expected it to be. All right, so some of these terms, right, hallucinations, as you would think it is, or false answers, we touched on them. Now, artificial intelligence, one of the use cases is to use it for training. So clearly the material that you want to train a body of students or learners on, you have to curate that or quality assurance, provide some measure of quality assurance of that material, right? You don't want any of these terms here, right? Biased against any sector of our society, prohibited language, inaccuracies, and so forth. And again, this slide was kind of put together and used a few months ago when, for each of the models, the large language model, remember we used ChatGPT as one of the examples, that was trained on a specific date. They actually picked and pointed that tool and they said, go learn the internet. And they did this and it learned everything that was contained in the internet, virtually everything in the internet prior to, I think it was September of 2021. A more recent version, I think, is in January of 2023. But basically, it's point in time learning, and that's how it gathers the information and builds its large language model. So there are some technologies which we will probably touch on a little bit later on in this discussion, but there are ways now when you can incorporate the power of a large language model and the power of generative AI with real-time queries and requests that are out there. One of the uses of that technology is called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. So the terms are coming out faster than we can even keep up with them. That term really started becoming commonly used this year, commonly used. Deep fakes. You can't watch a commentary or maybe a news show, 60 Minutes or 48 Hours, any of those. You can't watch them without them devoting at least some of the time to deep fakes. That's where they look so real and so legitimate that it's so hard to tell whether or not this is actually genuinely that person. There are many states that are contemplating legislation right now on whether or not they want to get specific and create legislation specifically aimed at deep fakes. Now we have elections coming up. That's going to be a huge challenge for how ethically this technology can be used within the election realm. So, and we have to be, I just wanted to touch on the word transparent. We have to be transparent of our use when we use generative AI. Usually most states, counties, and maybe even municipalities are citing the requirement to put on their websites or applications or app tools that, hey, generative AI or artificial intelligence is used to help produce this output. That's just part of being transparent. Wall Street Journal, right? This should come as a surprise to none of us, right? It's really going to be a huge challenge for all of us. When I shared this kind of initial like eyes-opening type with some of our state colleagues, right? Undoubtedly, the question, many of them, it was the first time they really had a meaningful kind of a discussion that explored this topic. So many of them asked a very relevant question. Well, can we use it now? So on this slide, you won't see the word yes, and you won't see the word no. I can't say that. You have to consider your state or your entities, right? Data and privacy, allowable use policy. I can tell you that New Jersey, early on, we put an AUP, an allowable use policy, on an interim basis out there with some information that we gathered with some research at the time. And we really anchored it to our state's privacy and acceptable use policy. You just don't want private data or state internal or state sensitive data to be put out there in commonly used tools in such a way that it can be that it can be harvested or used by others. A few slides later, I'm going to talk a little bit about what New Jersey is doing with regards to a generative AI task force. But again, my recommendation to folks on the business side, right? You're the folks that want to deliver services directly to the residents or the citizens of your jurisdiction, right? So, you want to explore ways on how you can use this amazing technology in ways that deliver better services. And I would only encourage, talk with your leadership, right? Bring up the questions, talk with your privacy officer. Most states, some counties have a data privacy officer or a chief data officer. Have conversations with them, understand whether or not your acceptable use policy adequately addresses the use of this technology. So some of the things that we talked about, just to be mindful of, again, the word in the opening slide here is, I definitely want to share information about and maybe evangelize the use of generative AI, but the word responsibly is front and center there. So we have to be cautious of some of these topics, right? Bias. We really don't want to disenfranchise any of our users, any of our residents, any of our citizens. I mentioned cyber, criminal, and fraud for a reason. So all of us here, right, we have to operate and we have to set up our technology services for our residents in an ethical way, in a proper way. So we have guardrails. We have guardrails that govern how we use this. The bad guys don't. They're going to use this technology. They're going to, and have already begun, finding ways that are either either unethical or fraudulent, or in some way just harness the power of this for ill-gotten means. So, that's one thing we have to keep in mind, that as much as all of the technologies that cyber criminals and fraudsters use, this is going to be another tool, a rather powerful one in their toolkit. I like the expression, a colleague of mine used this, and I thought it was pretty good. A lot of times when, they're embarking on a new program for a state agency, or, a new service that they're offering, a new government service for citizens or residents, sometimes the need to get that service out there, I've heard the term, well, we're trying to fly this plane as we're building it. I think Gen AI kind of takes it a step further, and, imagine flying the plane as you're building it, but you've never flown before, so you're also learning how to fly. That's how new this technology is in the grand scheme of things. And I mentioned earlier some of the headlines, and it would only take you about 3 seconds of searching, Google or Edge or some other search engine, and you can look up words like fraud or misinformation, disinformation, public trust, lawsuits, etc. New Jersey had a case that our state education department and our attorney general's office had to get involved with students' misuse of it. So lots of things to be mindful of on both sides. Again, it's not to say we can't use it. We absolutely need to use it because it's so powerful and can deliver services in ways that we would not have thought before. The lawsuits, I don't even know if a web search is accurate, because probably their lawsuits can be filed not only copyright and content, but also misuse and other ways that are generating defamatory slander. So these types of uses are out there, and it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we live with. I think I touched upon this. I don't know that there's much need, but it will never be 100% accurate, right? They're not guaranteed to never break. And again, this was in the April-May timeframe when the commonly used iteration was ChatGPT, and it was version 3, and that was trained at a specific date in 2021. So you couldn't ask it who won the 2022 World Series. Now, some of these tools, even by the service providers, that they can also augment, they do a web search with current content, and then they embed that information into the large language model to give you your answer. So this statement on a general basis is incorrect now, but it was correct at the time I produced this slide just a few months ago. So another indication of how quickly we're moving. So every vendor that's out there, I'm hard pressed to find software vendors, hardware vendors, service providers that don't say that some portion of their portfolio uses AI. There are terms that you've heard of AI versus generative AI, where generative AI is examples of what you'll see in just a few moments when Dave jumped into his demos. But it's really generating through that large language model. It's generating content. It's not just finding out an answer or a specific request, but it's literally generating content. So if you say AI in the broader sense, well, every spell checker, every word predictor, most of the tools that we have, are somehow integrated with artificial intelligence in an algorithmic sense. We certainly see our agencies given thoughts to, how can we all have limited resources in the number of call center agents or subject matter experts. So rather than press 1 for billing and press 2 for, repair, which obviously disenfranchises the users right in the beginning, some of these smart chat tools, and they're not that hard to implement now. Many service providers have gotten prompt engineering and fine tuning, skills like that, where they can take and orient a given use of a chatbot for a specific purpose. And again, like you're going to see two coming up pretty soon. One's for internal use and one's for external resident facing use. I think that'll be of great interest to you. Another topic is sentiment analysis, the sophistication of some of these large language models and the sophistication of I hate to say the word intelligence because it's not really intelligence in a common sense, but it can tell sentiment. It can tell one person who may be just looking for information and one person that's really ticked off at your company and is ready to escalate or is ready to, go on social media or so it has that capability as well, which is why it's so powerful for citizen engagement. And obviously predictive analytics, predicting hotspots, predicting clusters, predicting use cases in certain geographic areas, all part of this powerful capability. All right, I saw this and literally there's a company called Unstructured that they put this on their website, and I thought it was a pretty darn good explanation. So if you look on the bottom, and you ignore the middle vertical row there, that's basically, I'm going to, log in, I'm going to go to OpenAI or I'm going to go to Google's Bard, and I'm going to say, why is the ocean so deep, or what is, the origin of this species or that species. And that's a large language model, base LLM, fine-tuning it, and basically you'll get your response there. The fine-tuning or prompt submission, prompt engineering along the bottom. The vertical that's indicated here, and again, this is just indicative to kind of get some some visualization of how it works. But let's say you are within the, New Jersey Department of Agriculture, and you want to have a tool that uses artificial intelligence, but it's really focused on produce or farming and fresh vegetables and anything that is in your specific domain. Well, that's when you take domain-specific knowledge. That could be a collection of documents, PDFs, websites, websites with many sub pages underneath of it, and you put it through a tool that then I'll say merges it with, you'll notice that where the llama is, I guess that's a llama, right? That it doesn't create another LLM. So that's where the use of the terminology, you're not training another large language model. That's the thing that took 49 data centers worth, but rather you're running a process which ingests this data and it embeds it with your base data, and therefore then you can create at relatively low cost. It takes some skills and it takes some research, but you can create a domain-specific tool, which is your fine-tuned large language model. That's the lower right-hand camel wearing the wearing the mortarboard there. So that's not a perfect explanation, but I hope it kind of gives a little bit of a maybe information that may help you do additional research and questions later. Another way of viewing it is that take these three bullets, you get the contextual content, that was the top of the last page. You create a custom index, which basically does your, it creates the index, creates your vectors on that content, and then you embed it and you query your AI model. So it sounds simplistic, but I share those 3 points only to show, look how different the language is than if you were to talk to someone that may be in like one of our IT teams, and they would talk about coding and the data model, and they may talk about web pages, and they may talk about, so some of that language, it's changing right before our eyes. And I think, so some of those embedding and custom indexes and content and curation, right? These are the terms that are going to, I think, map out the skill sets going forward. I'm just showing this because it was an easy way to see it. As you can see up in the top left, I just typed in, show people waiting at a fruit stand. First, I misspelled the word fruit on purpose because it actually knew the context in which I was asking. It knew I probably meant fruit stand, so it took the liberty and created 3 images of a fruit stand. The 2 parts of this little demonstration on this page that I would point out are this. If you look in the middle, and the middle picture there, right, it shows fruit, and it obviously shows some kind of a storefront or a stand there, and it shows people in it, but and some vehicles in the background and so forth. But none of those individuals are real people. Like, they don't exist. They're not pictures that it found or scraped off the internet, but rather it literally generated those pictures, those images. And so a lot of times that's a concept that sometimes, you know, causes you know, food for thought. And if you look at the right-hand picture, you'll see the one gentleman pointing off in a distance, and the other fellow standing there to the right. But if you look closely, look at the hand, his left hand. It's malformed. It's got, like, looks like it's one finger, and it, you know, kind of wrapped around. So this is a good example. It's a subtle one, but it's one of those examples of a hallucination. And this one is in a visual creation from a tool called DALL-E. It's from Microsoft, or OpenAI Microsoft. And again, I just wanted to show you what hallucination means in a subtle sense. I wanted to see how well it could tell context when I first started learning about this. And I said, let's just take the word shoot. So the word shoot can have a number of different contexts. I wanted to see, right, if you asked it, hey, let's shoot for a 3 p.m. departure today, versus, you know, hey, let's hope nobody shoots anyone or injures anyone, right? So obviously it can tell the different context, all based upon the creation of that large language model. When this tool, OpenAI's ChatGPT, when it read the entire internet back in 2021, right, it did so in a way that it picked up so much language structure, language commonality, and nuances of the language that it can tell context. All right, so getting down into, let me take a quick time check. Okay, we're doing good. So, you know, from a government perspective, right, whether it's through media, whether it's through external sources, vendor community, and so forth, right, we've got to be aware, we've got to learn, right? But, you know, don't get pulled along too fast, and don't get seduced by this intense hype. It is very impressive. You know, you can use the old adage of, hey, it's a shiny object syndrome. Well, it is. It's very shiny, and it's a very interesting object in and of itself, and it's a fantastic capability, right? So we got to learn. But when we're running a business, like in my case, I would just have to say, right, we have to keep all of those agencies' websites and web applications and databases and search engines. We have to keep all that running day in and day out. So we can't avoid, we must avoid, you know, just committing everything to this technology, although it's fascinating, and we just have to strike the right balance. I would suggest, and I'm just sharing maybe from our own personal experience here in New Jersey, that some government entities may find it of interest to form some type of a group or a task force that puts conscious effort into such an effort and coming up with recommendations. What should our agency be doing or not doing, right? There are best practices and not best practices out there that we can all learn from. Take a look at your AUP, your acceptable use policy. Make sure that your attorneys review it. Make sure that your attorneys have exposure to this technology, because all legal professionals that are going to be working in this domain, they're going to have to learn just the impacts of this. It's going to be an incredibly fast learning cycle for them, because they're going to have to make very critical decisions in this regard. I'm just showing you this because Governor Murphy signed Executive Order 346, which basically set forth and set in place our artificial intelligence task force. Our focus is generative AI because, we recognize that, trying to take on every possible form of algorithmic AI, narrow, wide AI, it would probably be boiling the ocean. So we've assembled a task force, and tremendous people on this. We have people from universities, some of our state agencies, large companies, and it's just fantastic to work with these folks. We're just getting started. We are charged within that task force of producing a report for the governor within 1 year. Now we're already a month or two into this task force, but one of the first things that we all talked about was a year. This industry has changed dramatically in the past 3 months. So we don't think that we're going to be waiting a year. We all agree that we're going to produce, at the very minimum, an interim report, probably after 5 or 6 months, and then maybe a final one to study it additionally. Here's where we are. We're just at this kind of blue where we're commencing with our working groups. We have a working group that is focused on, and I think this is important, we have a working group. Think of it as a chair or a stool with 3 legs. One leg is on how New Jersey can optimize and benefit from the creativity, the innovation, and the power of the AI industry. How can we create and become a hub? Some of you may have seen that there was an announcement just yesterday that the state of New Jersey is partnering up with Princeton University in an effort along these lines. So we want to make sure that innovation and research and artificial intelligence becomes, New Jersey becomes a terrific site for that. Secondly, the second leg of the stool is education. We want to educate. We've got a rather audacious, and Beth Novak, whom I mentioned earlier, is highly active in this realm as well, of getting good, solid, current, and appropriate education we'd like to make it available for all of New Jersey's workforce. So that's a lot. We've got some 65,000 state employees. We would like to educate all of them on the various forms and benefits and capabilities of artificial intelligence. So that's going to be a big one for us. And then the third leg of the stool is the one that I'm asked to co-chair, which is basically use of artificial intelligence within government services, how we can deliver better service to our residents through the use of generative AI and do it responsibly. So that's our task force. We are now ready to, I'm sure many of you are going to breathe a huge sigh of relief to hear me stop talking. And joining us, Hannah, if you'd be so kind to make Dave the presenter. Dave Cole from our Office of Innovation is going to join us, and he's going to share with us a couple of use cases that he has, personally researched and developed and has been working with some of our state agencies. Dave?
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. Appreciate you joining us for the session here. What I thought I'd do is illustrate a couple of the concepts that Chris talked about, in particular, how responsible AI can help us improve the way we do business in government. By showing both an internal use case, something that we can use to help staff become more efficient at the work that they do, and an external use case, a way that AI can help fill the gaps, particularly in customer service, where we don't have the agent capacity or the previous technical tools to reach people and answer the questions that they have. I figured the best way to do this is to show those examples and then talk a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes. And I want to mention that both of these examples are actually building off of previous content that was discussed. Beth put together a session recently on text tools, and Chris covered this a bit too, about how you can use text tools to generate new information based off of contextual information that you provide. So what I'm showing here will be based off of those same principles, and in those sessions you can get a little bit more detail on how you can try these tools out for yourself. So the first example here that I wanted to share with everyone today is how we can gather and make sense of high volumes of feedback coming from residents and the public. What we're looking at here is a tool that the Department of Labor, working with our innovation team, put together to help people understand how to apply for maternity benefits. The state provides disability benefits as well as family leave benefits, which cover both birthing and non-birthing parents. And in trying to understand how those programs stack up and how residents can make the most of it, what we found is that particularly for birthing parents, it's challenging to understand how the TDI, the disability program, and the family leave program stack together. And so what this is a timeline where you can enter information about when you're expecting, the type of birth that you're planning to have, a couple other data fields, and it'll generate a calendar essentially for you of when your leave might start, when you'd need to apply, when your leave would change to a different program. But for the purposes of this conversation, we are doing a tactic here that we do with many of our other projects where we're including a form on the page, asking people to provide feedback on how the page is working. And it's a simple prompt. Did you find what you were looking for on this page? Yes or no? And then whether you say yes or no, it'll then ask you to enter free text. And the information that people enter then goes into a queue to review. Across the different programs, including unemployment insurance, the temporary disability family leave program that I mentioned, and some other ones where we're using this tool, we have literally thousands of messages coming in a given week. And so it becomes a lot for people to, on the inside, really make sense of. I'll give you just a quick visual here of the data on the other side. It's just a simple spreadsheet. We can see where the feedback comes from, so we can associate it with the content on the page. That initial rating, was the tool helpful or not? Or were you able to find what you were looking for, yes or no? And then the comment, which can help us find gaps in information. And what we want to be able to do here is see if we can use a GPT model to give us an analysis of this text, to pull out of all this data that we're getting in, what are the common themes? And we want to validate those themes by pulling some quotes from the feedback so that it's not just a theme that we can't really tie back to the content, but we see a theme, and then we see the actual quotes from residents that were submitted in the feedback. So what we're looking at here is an internal tool that we built, made available to staff behind a password, and it's using the GPT 3.5 model available through the Azure platform that Chris and the team have set up and made available for us. And what we are able to do here is pull in the data from that spreadsheet and generate a report. It could take a little bit of time to generate the report, up to about 30 seconds or so. That's going to run a prompt through it, and what we're going to see is a summary here. So I chose this specific page because the comments are a little lower, 22, so we can get a faster result, but this works up to 1,000 comments per each report. The first section here is maternity leave eligibility. We have some specific questions around understanding eligibility for some more complex use cases that perhaps could require or merit their own page of content on the website. The first being, if I haven't worked for a full year, am I still eligible to receive the maternal leave benefit? Does it apply to self-employed parents as well? Or I'm getting laid off and I'm going to file for an employment insurance. How do these benefits work together? So this gives us ideas now very easily to see some new content that could be generated for the site, some additional materials that could be offered for our call center agents to help answer these questions. And we could tighten the feedback cycle of getting this information in and producing something that can then hopefully make the situation better based on what we've learned. Just to give you a sense of a couple other topics, contacting the customer service center. There are folks who are trying to reach the call center and have had challenges with that, and they want to let us know about that. That has led to a series of work that also has an AI tie-in, but more a different kind of technology, the generative AI, to improve call center activities. And then on down the line, additional topics here. So we've made this available to the staff for a number of programs, as you can see, UI, maternity timeline, paid family leave. Behind the scenes, to get a sense of how this is working, we take the data that I showed you in the spreadsheet, and we send it along with a prompt to a GPT endpoint that we have deployed in Azure here. So we're just using the API that's available through the Azure platform. And the prompt is basically instructing the model that you are an assistant. Your job is to find the most common themes in this data of free text. It's going to be a list of user-generated comments from residents of New Jersey. We then say what program they're applying for so that the model has some context that it can pull in. And we want you to give us back 3 illustrative comments based off of the themes that you've highlighted. You can see that in the prompt there. This prompt in particular also does something a little bit more technical, which is it asks the model to return the data in a specific data format that we can then use on the website. That's how we're able to use the model not in the chat GPT interface that you may be used to, but in an actual interface tied into a website. So on the back end, that prompt gets sent to one of the models that we have in Azure. If you have access to Azure or OpenAI, Chris mentioned AWS services that work very similarly. Usually these have consoles where you can log in, deploy your models, get an API endpoint and a secure token that you can use to start querying the data that you give as context. So this is the first case. Like I said, we're using this in a couple programs now. Folks are using it every day. We found interesting items that were missing from content that we have used to both improve the website and particularly our call center menus and training scripts so that the call agents have the ability to help people in demand when they come in with these questions. The second example here I want to share is more on the resident-facing side. So how can we help people ask and answer questions about a program? In this case, we'll look at unemployment insurance. That might be fairly complicated and technical. In this case, it's a program that, for folks who know UI, this is probably putting it too simply, but has significant layers of regulations and rules because it's a federal and a very old program and the state operates it. And all of that means burden for the residents who have to go try to figure out, I'm facing unemployment. I need some support to be able to get back on my feet, get back into the workforce. How do I get through this process? And obviously this could be a time that could be very stressful for folks as well. So we want to do whatever we can to try to improve the experience for people that are going through this process. The department here has had a chatbot for a while now, rolled it out very quickly throughout the pandemic. It's a traditional kind of chatbot using a search engine on the back end. So the way it works is to look at the website, and when a user enters a question, to pull the most relevant content from the web page. And this works pretty well if your website covers all the content explicitly that the user is looking for. But what happens when you ask a question that's not quite explicitly defined and requires a little bit more context? This is where we've been testing out a generative AI-based model to be able to put together these responses. So I just asked this a question just to cue things up. Can I get UI if I quit? The response that I get back, it's not inaccurate, but it's fairly generic. We look at a number of factors for qualifying unemployment, when you're out of work, why you might have left work. It doesn't really answer the question specifically, but it gives people general information, and that kind of shows you the tone of what might be available on the website. So we put together here, and we're in the process of working with the Department of Labor to get this out as a pilot on the website too. We're going to look at just a staging site here of the same kind of chatbot interface, but we're going to tie into that same API through Azure that I mentioned before. The first thing I want to show is what happens if I ask a completely irrelevant question, because as Chris highlighted, one of the things that can happen with these large models is if you ask questions that aren't particularly germane, the model might try to answer it, and it might actually end up being the content that you don't want to put up on your website. So this will just be a very simple question. Why is the sky blue? It's going to send this question along with the prompt. And what's happening in the back end here too, is it's sending the question, but it's also sending what we call embedded context. That's all the information that's on this website has been processed down to a format that we can include in the prompt as an embedded context. And we send that to the model, and then we get back the response. Well, in this case, this question is not relevant to unemployment insurance in New Jersey, so I can't answer that question for you. Fair enough, that's what we want. Let's go back to the question about what happens if I quit my job. We're looking for maybe something a little bit more specific than we were able to get through the search index here. You'll see here that these prompts are slower than search, obviously, and this is, I think, one of the trade-offs with using these kinds of models. It could take 15 seconds sometimes to generate a response because it's going through that embedded context, but the trade-off hopefully is that the response is a little bit more accurate. So to determine eligibility equipment here, specific to circumstances, generally if you quit without a good cause, you may not be eligible. However, if you have a good cause for quitting, such as unsafe working conditions or a significant change in the terms and conditions of employment, you might still be eligible. So then this is giving the user a lot more kind of guidance to go off of to make a decision about what they should do. Ideally, the next step here is we give the resident a link to apply or potentially access to call the call center if they need more specific information to their case. And of course, this is just scratching the surface. What we're doing here is just looking at the public web content. Eventually, over time, because we're operating in a more secure cloud environment, not in just kind of the public APIs, we'd like to be able to pull in context specific to a user's claim to help them understand really where they are in the process. But those are further out experiments that we think once we get this foundation in place, we'll be able to test more. So then just to show you real quick what's happening behind the scenes here, I think the keys for an example like this, we want to provide context about our program. We scraped all the content from the website. We just ran a script that downloads all the HTML files, converts them to text. We process that and we send that information to the model. So we're telling the model, you're a chatbot, your job is to provide answers to the questions. The context here is specific to unemployment insurance. It's official information. And then you're going to get a question after this context. And we want you to provide accurate responses. This is a fun one that researchers have found that if you just try to be a little bit encouraging to your model, you'll tend to get better results. So take your time and try to answer based on the provided context. Actually can improve results over not having something like that. We want to only answer relevant questions. That's why you saw the rule in place that filtered out the blue sky question. And then, as Chris has mentioned before, we want to provide today's date. And also, if we've, in our embedded context, included something that's updated, that's not part of the training of the model, we want the date to reference that there's more recent information here. And then here's your question. So that's what goes back to the model. Again, using the same backend technology, we're using the API. We're sending the prompts through an API request and then displaying it just through this website here. But the end result, we hope, is that we have a more conversational format for generating information that can help answer people's questions, can be available 24/7. We start as a pilot on the website where we can get feedback over time, and hopefully not too far from now. We want to be able to tie this into our call center too, which actually uses an AI tool for text to speech. So we can have people ask a question, convert that to speech to text, send it to the same system and get the response, and then read back the response to users on the phone. It's particularly helpful in moments where perhaps agents are fully busy helping other customers. You just need to get some information quickly through a tool like this. So these are two examples, internal and external, that we're excited about. Would be happy to answer any questions you have on them and looking forward to your feedback.
Hey, Dave,
Chris?
thanks so much for just, again, just sharing those tips of the iceberg kind of things. And Hannah, I'm going to ask you to do the tough job of maybe helping to pick, maybe there's some clusters of some commonality with some questions. And two points, though, that I would like, if you remember, Dave, a couple times had up there what looked like a dashboard. And he used the term, in our Azure tenant. It's important to distinguish for those that may not have had yet some familiarity with these tools, right? The difference between a public, open, free service like OpenAI, right, where you literally can go to ChatGPT, and that's where you can ask it, why is the sky blue? And it gives you an answer all about Rayleigh scattering and how the molecules bump into each other and all that good stuff. But the difference is that we the state of New Jersey, we have a subscription, a secure subscription with firewalls and transit gateways built around it. It's a secure address space that we can only get to when authenticated. So the tools that we build and the tools that Dave is building here, they're not, that information is not going out like I just put my name or whatever into OpenAI or Titan or Bard, right? But rather it's staying within our tenant. That's important because when you consider what use cases you may want, you do not want your data in a space, even if it's, you may or may not even want your public data. And now in this case, Dave took his software, I'll frame it this way. The software that Dave created to go look at basically the the New Jersey Department of Labor, look at the main website and all of the subtending websites, all the documents, PDFs, policies, procedures, calendars, all that. And that's what the AI, OpenAI within our Azure tenant, that's what it used to generate its information. So as we leave this, I mean, there's a lot of research that this begs, and of course, but it's important to understand from the jump the difference between use of a publicly available open tool, which the information will be harvested, will be used, will build other language models, will do all that, versus using the same technology of a large language model, but in a secured large language model, encrypted, protected environment. That's part of the caution, if you will, of using the technology. And then the second part Dave touched on real briefly. Where are we going to get to most likely? Where are we going to get to next? Well, in addition to the use of these tools where they're easier to read, they're easier to understand, but now we're going to have the ability to say, if a person is saying, where's my local office for unemployment? Or, how long does it normally take? But then if that person says, I want to know the status of my claim, well, that changes the whole paradigm, because then the AI is going to have to say, what is your name? What's your social? What's your other identifying information? Maybe your driver's license, maybe your address, maybe your claim number, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where the use of person-specific API calls are going to augment. That's part of what we call the RAG, or retrieval augmented generative technology. So I just wanted to touch on those two because Dave's example brought them out so nicely. So Hannah, I think I've been through the slides, and Dave has been through the demos. Happy to be at your service to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Chris and Dave. Let me just stop the recording.